Because I Could Not Stop for Death by Emily Dickinson. Coming up for discussion today, but first, a quick reading.
Death.
Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves, and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too, for his civility. We passed the school where children strove, at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day. I first surmised the horses' heads were towards eternity.
Kind of ends there abruptly for being eternity.
Eternity.
So be
All
honest,
right,
be honest. No, be honest. How many words did you have to look up?
I have to look up words quite frequently. I must have just gotten lucky. No, I think I got all of these ones.
Really? Oh, I had to look up several. I'm like, oh, what does that mean? That's old school word.
I guess let's start with what we do know, right? Who is our narrator in this one? Because she couldn't stop for death. It says it right there, title. And what kind of a person did you take that she was?
I feel like Emily was talking about herself, and I feel like that she is somebody that knows death very well, is intimate with death. I feel like death has become a friend of hers, and whether that's because of people that have died in her life or whether just people are just naturally going to die, if this is something that she has a fascination for, but it's obviously something that's very prevalent, and I don't think it's something that's scary. It's something that she feels comfortable writing about in this, very, very poetic fashion.
When I listened to this poem, this narrator, she felt very powerful to me, but she also felt, I don't know, busy, right? Like she had to put aside her leisure, and it was something where like death is something that we can't control, right? It's like one of the few things out of our control, but it's one of the few things all of us must face. And it almost like she became a partner with death in a sense. And that's not a small feat, right? Like it feels that this is a remarkable woman to be able to approach death with such dignity, such civility.
Yeah, so just a little bit about Emily Dickinson. She was a recluse. She definitely was somebody that was not going out to parties all the time. She spent a lot of time alone, a lot of time at her house. Her house was like, I think, across a street or near a cemetery, so she was probably seeing burials all the time. It was believed that she wrote this 1855 to 1863. It was published in 1863. I think there were people in her family that died at that time period. She lost a cousin and I think like a sibling very young as well. So she's very familiar with death. And I think it's something that fascinates her more than scares her. And this is a way of her letting people know that death is okay. It's something that you can accept and not be fearful of.
Isn't that crazy to think? I mean, we all must go face death, have to go through death. Yet we all have no idea what happens at that moment, right? We have entire belief systems around the rewards of life leading you to an eternal life or some type of reward afterwards. You've got people who are materialists and say, no, there is no such thing as anything after life. My body's going to die and I'll return to the ground. It's crazy how there's nothing else in this world that we can know so much that we're heading towards, but we have no idea what happens at that moment. Right. And here's Emily's poem where she gets into this carriage, which again, carriage, is that a symbol? Like there's a lot of capitalization in this poem where you're wondering like we're in here with immortality and it's capitalized and you're like, okay, what does that mean? Is immortality a person? Is it just a symbol of something that when we get into the carriage, almost like, when you get into the boat for the river Styx, it's what carries you to the afterlife. We lead towards the grave in this poem, in a sense. Like there's a lot of symbolism, but at the same time, she's starting to explore, I don't know, how did you take what they're exploring? Because they go to like a school, the grains in the field, like they're almost like exploring something here. How did you take that?
Well, I think we start with the first stanza. It's Emily's introducing death as an old comrade, a friend, somebody that she's known her whole life, because a lot of us are familiar with death at certain points in our life. So when you reach death, you've probably, unless, I guess you wouldn't be watching this if you passed away already, so that doesn't make sense. But if you're still watching this, most likely you're alive. You may have some experience with death, right? Like Emily did. And so if you live until your elder years, you are most likely going to be familiar with death. And I think that since we don't know what's going to happen afterwards, she is surmising that it will be immortal because life is finite. I think that's what she maybe is trying to say here, is it gives meaning to life, is that it is something that it has a finality. And then we move into that second stanza with moving us through life, through the carriage, on to the next stage of our existence, which is going to be the final stage of your existence. It's going to be immortal. And then I think the next, as we move into that third stanza with the school, is, for me, I kind of take that as, is this her reminiscing through her life? I mean, we have stages in our life, even back as far as, she lived 170 years ago. You have your young self living at home with your family, and then you go to school, and then you decide what you want to do with your life after that. Do you stay home? Do you go get a job? Do you have children? And so I think that she's kind of moving through her life, and that idea of that your life flashes before your eyes when you die, and you think about what you did and what you didn't do.
So if we take it as the stages of life, like the recess, the ring, the grain, you can even take Valhalla, like the fields where you go to die as a great warrior. You took that as her specific life. So it's almost kind of like, you could almost compare it to Dickens' A Christmas Carol, right? Like Scrooge is forced to look at his childhood and the choices and maybe what led him to be the man that he was, right? There's the present, the impact that he has on the people, and ultimately look to the future where he sees the grave, the cold. And I think even in this poem, there's that mentioning about how the dews drew quivering and chill, right? Oh, the future, and death is approaching. So we get the cold and we see the grave. You can almost view it kind of like a Christmas Carol, where she's seeing the different stages of her own life and her impact and the choices that she made. But what's interesting is whoever this narrator is, whether it's a version of Emily Dickinson or someone else, I think she's strong, because she's showing us how, okay, death, you're coming, let's go to this together. And she faces it with dignity, I would say. Like, she definitely approaches this very calmly for what is ultimately something that usually can be very scary for a lot of people.
Definitely. And then I love how the poem shifts after 3, and you see that whoever the narrator is kind of almost has a hesitation, looking at that, and again, I had to look up, that she's wearing a nightgown and she feels underdressed. You're going to meet death and immortality, your next phase of your existence, and she feels, less than, and she kind of loses a little bit of that strength until she realizes, oh, no, I am okay. That this is what's supposed to happen. And I like that she, gains her resolve again as she moves forward into her next piece of her afterlife.
Yeah. And it says in that last part, to your point, since then, 'tis centuries, right? So a lot of time has passed, but it feels shorter than a day, right? We have the horse's head, we're heading towards eternity. And, this is, I guess, when we talk about those worldviews, Emily Dickinson, for those of you who are looking into her background, had a heavily religious background, in her younger years and such, particularly too, right? So the idea that your labors, your fruits by the sweat of my brow, led her towards that eternal reward, the promise of eternity, essentially eternal life.
And then I like how that internal life is a little bit scary as we move into stanza 5, of that basically for most people, you're stuffed in a box and put in the ground. And that has become the standard for a lot of, people's afterlife. And that's your new home. That's your forever home. And I don't know if we've ever discussed this before, but like, not for crypto. I'm going to be a tree. And there's a thing. You can actually become a tree. They take your ashes and you're cremated. They take your ashes and they put it inside of dirt with a seed and you get to grow into a tree. And that's what I'm going to be, because I fear kind of, I think, what the narrator feared here of, that's your eternity, or could be your eternity.
That is super cool. I think I know some of your role models that might have influenced you for that. But thank you for sharing that. What did you guys think of this poem? Did you have a much different interpretation? Let us know in the comments down below. My name's been Una. Peace.
Playlist down below for other Emily Dickinson talks. Peace.